Today's story is about someone or something evil that was responsible for the disappearances of small children. This story is based on true events. In 1812, in the country of Sweden and in the area of Gysinge, lied a small rural community. The area is vast and covers several hundred square miles of forest and farms. It's a beautiful area where its various types of foliage, people, and wildlife all live together in harmony. In December of the same year, there was a family of 5 that lived together in a quaint home on a huge plot of land. The family consisted of a husband, wife, and 3 small children. Their names were Jonathan, who was 4 years old, Tabitha, who was 12 years old, and Hans, who was 9 years old. Jonathan was a sickly child that his mother nurtured him back to health, so they obviously had a really close relationship with one another. Jonathan observed his mother work hard all day in their home and sincerely just wanted to repay her for her kindness. He would always ask his mom, "Are you okay?" or "I want to help you." Even though he was too small to actually help with anything, she saw his little face and it just warmed her heart up. One day, little Jonathan and his big brother Hans completed their chores for the day. Their mother asked that they go outside. This would give her the time and space needed to complete dinner before her husband came home. So the 2 boys went outside and began playing. Whenever their mother got a free minute in between chores, she was able to periodically look out the window and keep an eye on the children as they played. Hans had an idea and told his little brother to follow him. Not too far from their house was the tree line, which is where the forest began. The 2 boys walked all the way up to the tree line and then into the forest together. Hans knew where a freshwater stream was and wanted to play there. The stream was not far from the tree line, maybe only 60 yards away, and Jonathan followed him. The boys both played in the water for only a few minutes before Hans told Jonathan that it was time to go. Hans knew he shouldn't have left the front of their home, but he only figured they would be gone for a few minutes and be back before their mother would even notice their absence. Hans and Jonathan quickly marched back towards the house. During the march, Hans wanted to play a little joke on Jonathan, so he took off running ahead of his little brother until he was out of sight. Jonathan, who was much smaller, noticed the distancing between his brother and himself during the run, so he became worried and called out for his brother to wait for him. Hans just chuckled and continued to run faster. Because it was getting close to dusk, the tree cover made it appear darker in the forest than it actually was. Jonathan became scared because he couldn't see his brother anymore, so he cried tears and yelled out to Hans to come back. Hans continued to run until he was completely out of the forest and back at the doorstep of their house. This joke was planned by Hans to scare his brother, so he stood outside of the house waiting for his brother to exit the tree line so he could tease him about it. About 3 or 4 minutes passed, and by now, Jonathan should have exited the forest. This began to worry Hans. Their mother saw Hans alone, so she frantically came outside and asked, "Where were you and where's your brother?" Hans had a blank expression on his face, but then he replied, "It's okay, he is right behind me." As soon as that sentence came out of his mouth, they both heard a loud, terrifying scream that sounded like Jonathan. So Mom and Hans ran at top speed into the woods, but when they got there, it was only silence. They weren't able to tell what direction the scream actually came from. They stood there yelling out for Jonathan at the top of their lungs. There was no response. Directly ahead of them, about 20 yards or so, they witnessed a thick brush moving as if something huge was struggling inside of it. Without thinking about their own safety and what it might be, they didn't hesitate to forcibly start using their bodies to march and pry their way through the thick brush. They pushed and moved until they finally broke through and saw an opening. They initially couldn't see anything because it was dark. It wasn't until their eyes adjusted and then they looked closer, they saw thick pools of blood on the ground. When the mother saw this, she immediately dropped to her knees, cried tears, and gave out a loud scream calling out for Jonathan. Her mother's intuition knew at that moment something bad had happened to her son. The mother and Hans then ran back to the house and saw the husband and daughter waiting for them. When she explained what happened to Jonathan, her husband immediately sprang to his feet, grabbed his guns and lamp, and then ran at top speed into the darkness by himself. His wife went to the neighbor's house and requested their help with the search, and nearly everyone left the house to assist. For hours, they collectively searched the entire area where Jonathan was last seen, and they found absolutely nothing. They were all exhausted and had to go home, but in the morning they promised to return with more volunteers from the area to help with the search. They kept their promises to return and did so along with the authorities. For 2 days, the entire community searched in shifts, but no traces of Jonathan were ever found. Eventually, everyone had to move on, and Jonathan was presumed deceased. Within the next 10 days, 2 more children disappeared under similar circumstances. One child was a 10-year-old boy and the other a 13-year-old girl. The boy was last seen walking home from school, and the other was sent to a local store to pick up some groceries. Both were last seen walking in the forest. The community came together again, and another search of the area was conducted, but no traces were found. Rumors had started that the 2 young children possibly ran away together. They didn't find out until later on that something evil had come this way, and it was a manufactured evil. Before anyone had time to figure out what steps should be taken next, another child turned up missing again under similar circumstances. Some residents believed that a hermit madman was living in the woods, and others that were more superstitious believed that a demon was attacking and eating their children. Whatever the unseen entity was, the children continued to vanish. So now the local authorities began to do patrols in the forest on a regular basis, but this didn't stop or even slow down the kidnappings of children. The authorities now instructed everyone to completely avoid the forest altogether and only use the road system to travel as they did. 2 children, while using the road system, were abducted on the same day. One was in the morning and the other was in the evening. The child abduction in the evening managed to break free of the creature's grasp and survive. The child returned to safety with deep scratches all over her face and body, along with a huge bite mark on her shoulder. They looked at the injuries and couldn't quite tell what type of animal caused them. It looked like maybe a dog bite, but none were this huge with giant claws to leave these types of marks. The child was unable to give any real information on her attacker because it was too dark when she was attacked. The authorities created multiple patrol units in order to capture or unalive the actor. Over the next 7 weeks, a total of 12 children had been unalived. Their bodies were being found in different areas throughout the forest, torn to pieces and half-eaten. Although it appeared to be an animal that was committing these attacks, no one was able to determine what kind of local beast would hunt like this. The children were instructed by their parents to walk in packs in order to protect themselves. The attacks continue, but the children survive by fighting off the beast. The animal had turned out to be an extremely huge lone wolf. Although they were all relieved to find out what they were hunting, no one could understand why this wolf's behavior was so different than any of the other wolves that they had ever encountered. It wouldn't be until much later that they would discover what was different about this creature compared to all the other wolves. Over the next 2 months, there were a total of 30 attacks on children. Eventually, the animal was cornered and unalived. One of the hunters had noticed something strangely familiar about the animal. When he examined the markings on the fur, which were unique, he was sure that this animal used to be another local's resident pet. This unnamed person had found the wolf as a baby and kept it as a pet for several years before setting it free back into the forest. And that's when all of the hunters looked at each other and they knew exactly what happened. Because the wolf was taken out of his habitat at a young age and then placed into the wild as an adult, it began to starve. Starvation drove the beast to have an enhanced aggression, and that led the wolf to have no fear of humans. Then it had to teach itself how to hunt for food in order to survive. That's when everyone realized that living in harmony with nature is more than just being kind to animals. It's about letting them live.